In the summer of 1986, workers digging at a construction site in Sichuan province, southwestern China, struck something hard beneath the soil. They cleared the dirt from the surface and found bronze. Not a coin, not a tool, a face. A human face, cast in bronze, with eyes that bulged from their sockets on thick cylindrical stalks, a nose like a blade, and ears swept back into pointed fins. It was unlike anything ever recovered from ancient China. It was unlike anything recovered from anywhere. What followed that first strike of a shovel would rewrite the history of Chinese civilization. Beneath that field lay the remains of a culture that had flourished 3,000 years ago, a culture that had mastered bronze casting at a level that astonished modern metallurgists, that had built walled cities and conducted ceremonies of extraordinary elaboration, and that had then, without any explanation preserved in the historical record, simply vanished. No one had known it existed. No ancient Chinese text mentioned it by name. No legend had preserved its memory. It had been erased so thoroughly that its rediscovery felt less like archaeology and more like the opening of a sealed room. This is the story of Sanxingdui. The story actually begins not in 1986 but over half a century earlier, in 1929. A farmer named Yan Daoqing was digging an irrigation ditch on his land near the town of Guanghan, in the Chengdu plain of Sichuan province, when his spade hit a layer of jade and stone artifacts. He pulled them out, sold some to local dealers, and the find drew the attention of a Cantonese antiquities collector who recognized their significance. A small excavation followed in 1934, the first formal archaeological work at the site. A handful of jade and stone objects were recovered. Then the Second Sino-Japanese War intervened, the excavation was abandoned, and Sanxingdui slipped back into obscurity for 5 decades. When construction workers returned the site to international attention in 1986, the scale of what lay beneath became undeniable. 2 large sacrificial pits were excavated that year, and what came out of them stopped the archaeological world cold. Over 1,000 objects were recovered from those 2 pits alone: bronze vessels, bronze masks, bronze figures, ivory tusks, gold objects, jade pieces, and cowrie shells. The bronzes were not merely impressive in quantity. They were, in terms of scale and artistic conception, completely without parallel in the known archaeological record of ancient China. The largest bronze mask recovered from Pit 2 measures over 130 centimeters wide. Its eyes protrude on cylindrical stalks extending more than 16 centimeters from the face, a feature that has no equivalent in any other ancient culture on Earth. A bronze standing figure found in the same pit stands 172 centimeters tall on a base, giving it a total height of over 2.5 meters, making it the tallest bronze human figure from the ancient world. Archaeologists working at the site in the summer heat of a Sichuan excavation described a growing sense of disorientation. Nothing they were pulling from the earth matched what they had been taught to expect from ancient Chinese Bronze Age culture. The excavations continued. Between 2020 and 2022, 6 additional sacrificial pits were identified and excavated using modern techniques: controlled humidity chambers, 3D scanning, on-site conservation, yielding thousands more objects, including a remarkable bronze vessel whose top is crowned with the figure of a kneeling human supporting a sacred tree, and a gold mask that may be the finest gold work yet recovered from ancient China. After 90 years of intermittent excavation, Sanxingdui is still releasing its secrets. The people of Sanxingdui inhabited the Chengdu plain from approximately 2800 BCE, though their most dramatic cultural fluorescence, the period that produced the extraordinary bronzes, dates to roughly 1600 to 1100 BC, overlapping with the Shang dynasty that ruled the Yellow River Valley to the northeast. They built a walled city. The rammed earth walls of the main urban center at Sanxingdui enclosed an area of approximately 3.5 square kilometers, with walls in some sections reaching 6 meters in height and 40 meters in width at the base. This was not a village. This was a major urban center, capable of sustaining a substantial and stratified population. Their command of bronze technology was extraordinary. Bronze Age cultures across the world worked the alloy of copper and tin, but the Sanxingdui bronzesmiths operated at a level of technical ambition that specialists still regard with something close to awe. The consistent alloy composition across thousands of objects implies sophisticated control of the smelting process. The production of a mask over a meter wide or a standing figure 2.5 meters tall required mastery not only of the metallurgy but of the lost wax or piece mold casting techniques needed to produce such forms without structural failure. Some of the objects recovered show evidence of deliberate assembly from separately cast components, implying a production process organized at something approaching industrial scale. The culture was saturated with ritual and ceremony. The sacrificial pits themselves are not burial grounds in any conventional sense. There are no human skeletal remains associated with them. What they contain are the remnants of ceremonial deposits, objects that appear to have been deliberately broken, burned, and interred. Ivory tusks appear in enormous quantities. Over 100 were recovered from Pit 2 alone, stacked in layers. Whether these represented offerings to deities, the property of a particular ruler deposited at death, or something else entirely remains debated. What is clear is that the community that buried these objects was organized enough to acquire and accumulate them over time and wealthy enough to destroy them. The standing bronze figures, several of which survive in fragmentary form, are depicted with hands positioned in a specific gesture, arms extended forward, fingers curled as though gripping an object that is no longer there. The most widely accepted interpretation is that they originally held ivory tusks or ritual staffs. They wear elaborate layered garments with geometric ornamentation. Their faces are stylized but specific, high cheekbones, large eyes, thin lips, and that defining feature of Sanxingdui iconography, the ear extensions that sweep back from the head in forms found nowhere else in the ancient world. These are not generic representations of human beings. They are images of particular types of ritual specialists or perhaps divine intermediaries, rendered with a precision that implies a coherent and developed religious cosmology behind them. The bronzes of Sanxingdui are so different from the ritual bronzes of the contemporary Shang dynasty that for years after their discovery, some scholars struggled to accept that they were genuinely Chinese in origin. Shang bronzes are vessels, food and wine containers decorated with stylized animal faces and geometric patterns, used in ancestral worship rites. Sanxingdui bronzes are human faces, trees, animals, and composite figures of a kind that have no Shang parallel whatsoever. The two cultures were separated by roughly 1,000 kilometers and, apparently, by an enormous cultural gulf. Yet the chemical analysis of the bronzes tells a more complicated story. Studies of the lead isotope signatures in Sanxingdui bronzes have found evidence suggesting that some of the raw materials used in their production may have been sourced from the same or deposits used by Shang bronzesmiths in the Yellow River Valley. This finding, contested and still under active debate, raises the possibility of at least intermittent contact or trade between the two cultures, contact that somehow left no trace in the historical record of either. That historical silence is perhaps the deepest mystery of all. Ancient China produced an extraordinary documentary tradition. Oracle bones from the Shang period, inscribed with questions put to ancestors and deities, survive in their tens of thousands. Later Zhou dynasty texts describe the geography and cultures of the known world in considerable detail. None of them mention Sanxingdui, a walled city of potentially tens of thousands of people, producing bronze objects of astonishing sophistication, flourishing for centuries on the Chengdu Plain, and not a single surviving text from its contemporaries acknowledges its existence. How does a civilization of that scale disappear from every record? The Sanxingdui script question adds another layer of unresolved complexity. Unlike the Indus Valley civilization, Sanxingdui does not appear to have had a developed writing system of the kind found in the contemporary Shang culture. A small number of incised marks on pottery and bronze have been identified, and some researchers argue these represent a proto-writing system. The mainstream view is that if such a system existed, it has not survived in decipherable form. A culture of this sophistication, operating without writing, or with a writing system that has left no recoverable trace, is a historical anomaly that resists easy explanation. The Chengdu Plain is, by the standards of ancient agriculture, an exceptionally favorable environment. Fed by rivers descending from the Tibetan Plateau, it is naturally well-watered, with rich alluvial soils capable of supporting dense population. The ancestors of the Sanxingdui people had been farming the plains since at least the 3rd millennium BC. The gradual accumulation of agricultural surplus, the development of specialized craft production, and the growth of long-distance exchange networks in jade, bronze, and prestige goods created the conditions for urban complexity. By 1600 BCE, that complexity had produced the walled city and the extraordinary ritual culture whose physical remains still astonish us today. For roughly 500 years, Sanxingdui flourished. Then, somewhere around 1100 to 1000 BCE, the city was abandoned. The sacrificial pits, containing some of the most precious objects the culture had produced, were sealed. The population dispersed. A new center, called Jinsha, appears to have emerged about 50 kilometers to the south, near modern Chengdu, and continued some cultural traditions of Sanxingdui in modified form for several more centuries. But the great city itself was left to the earth. The theories are multiple and genuinely contested. The most widely discussed is seismic or hydrological disruption. The Chengdu Plain sits in a geologically active zone, and evidence of significant earthquake activity and river course changes in the relevant period has been identified. If the Minjiang River, which watered the plain, shifted its course, a well-documented phenomenon in this region over geological time, it could have undermined the agricultural base that supported the city. Flood deposits identified at some Sanxingdui excavation layers are consistent with major inundation events. Other scholars emphasize the possibility of external pressure. The period around 1100 BCE was one of significant disruption across the Bronze Age world, and some researchers connect the collapse of Sanxingdui to broader regional instability. None of these theories has been definitively confirmed. The abandonment of Sanxingdui remains, like so much else about it, an open question. The impact of Sanxingdui on our understanding of ancient China has been profound and still unfolding. Before its rediscovery, the standard narrative of Chinese Bronze Age civilization centered almost entirely on the Yellow River Valley cultures, the Erlitou, the Shang, the early Zhou, as the singular cradle of Chinese civilization. Sanxingdui demolished that model. It proved that during the same period in which the Shang were developing writing, bronze ritual vessels, and ancestor worship in the northeast, an entirely different and independently sophisticated urban culture was flourishing in the southwest, a culture with its own distinct artistic vocabulary, its own ritual system, and its own technological achievements. Chinese historians now speak not of a single cradle of civilization but of multiple regional Bronze Age cultures developing in parallel across a vast geographic area, with complex patterns of contact, exchange, and divergence between them. Sanxingdui did not fit the existing story. It rewrote it. The ongoing excavations of the 6 new pits, announced to global attention in 2021, have generated enormous public and scholarly interest. The use of cutting-edge conservation technology, On-site climate-controlled excavation tents, real-time 3D mapping, isotopic analysis, has made the new work a model for large-scale archaeological projects worldwide. Thousands of objects remain to be fully studied. The site itself covers an area that archaeologists estimate has been only partially explored. What else lies beneath the Chengdu Plain, beneath the fields and roads and modern city of Guanghan, is unknown. What has already been recovered is enough. The bronze masks of Sanxingdui, with their impossible eyes staring from a face unlike any other in the ancient world, have become one of the most recognizable images in Chinese archaeology, symbols of a civilization that the historical record forgot, that the earth preserved, and that a farmer's shovel brought back to the light. Sanxingdui forces a question that archaeology keeps returning to, no matter how many sites are excavated, no matter how many objects are dated and catalogued and placed behind glass in museum cases. How much have we missed? The standard histories of ancient China were written for centuries without any knowledge that a walled city of this scale, a bronze tradition of this ambition, a ritual culture of this elaboration, had existed in Sichuan at all. It was not a minor omission. It was the erasure of an entire civilization from collective memory, an erasure so complete that not a single legend, not a single poem, not a single administrative record preserved its name. And if Sanxingdui was hidden for 3,000 years beneath a farmer's field in one of the most densely populated regions of China, a region that has been continuously inhabited since the Bronze Age, then the question becomes almost vertiginous. What is hidden beneath the Amazon basin, where LiDAR surveys are only beginning to reveal the scale of pre-Columbian urbanization? What lies under the West African rainforest, where tropical conditions destroy organic materials and acidic soils consume bone? What is waiting beneath the deserts of Central Asia, where ancient Silk Road cities appear from the sand after centuries of burial and then are swallowed again? We are accustomed to thinking of history as something that accumulates, that each generation knows more than the last, that the picture grows clearer over time. Sanxingdui is a reminder that history also disappears, that civilizations of genuine sophistication and scale can vanish so completely that the very fact of their existence has to be rediscovered from scratch by a farmer with a shovel in a field in Sichuan on an otherwise ordinary summer afternoon. The earth holds more than we know. It always has.